So in this administrative lesson, we're going to cover building workflow as well as record retention and setting that for types of documents, and what we refer to as variable naming, which gives you the ability to name documents consistently for the same types. So how we're going to begin is to build a workflow. Now, in the example here, I always suggest drawing out your workflow so you can, at least when you go to build it, have something to reference. Let me do something here though. Really what we're going to end up doing is building two separate workflows. In other words, this one right here doesn't exist at the moment. Okay, so what we want to do is just to be able to build and handle an invoice, and we're going to have Bill take care of that first, and then once Bill processes it, Sam does his process. Pam is going to do the posting to the GL, but notice that these are at the same level. What that means is these are not dependent on each other. In other words, Sam couldn't process this until Bill reviewed it, for example. In this case, though, once it's been approved, the check's been printed, Ralph can go ahead and mail the checks, and Pam might be making sure that the posting or the update to the general ledger takes place. So let's build this as a workflow to begin. What I'm going to accomplish is I'm going to be able to have my document type, as you'll notice here, be able to have a workflow here so that a workflow can process this. Okay, so let's begin by building the workflow. So I'm going to go to Menu, Administration, because this workflow is the user's workflow to see what they have outstanding and supervisor and so forth. Here, under Admin, we're going to move down to Workflow, and the first thing we're going to do is build the workflow itself. So in this case, we're going to call this, we'll call this vendor invoicing. I'll just call it vendor invoicing. Okay, now I've set up the workflow. I can now select the supervisor that will be monitoring, or have the ability at least to look up and see what's going on with all of the workflow tasks that this supervisor would be in charge of. So we'll just pick Dorothy here. And here we can put in a note to say this is, the processing of a vendor invoice. Okay, when I'm done setting up what I'll call the header, I'll save that. Okay, now I'm going to bring that back up, and when I bring it back up, you're going to notice two extra buttons. So I'm going to scroll down, or I could, obviously it's really close, I could search for it also and type in, anything that has VE in it, for example. So in here, I'm going to click on Vendor Invoice, and as I mentioned, you will notice two other buttons. This first button, Email. This is if you want the system to email a person or persons every time the document status changes, meaning it moves on to the next person. This could be as the supervisor if he or she wants to get email notification as well. This could be three people. They don't have to be users of the system. And if you don't bother to put anybody, not a problem. That would just be the email. Now, when we set up task details, we're going to assign the person followed by the sequence number, and we'll mention what sequence number as we get going. And this is just a duration of days, just a ballpark on how long you think that might take, because then it will show up in red after those number of days when it's their task. So what I'm going to do here is bring back up that screen, and we're just looking at this side. So the first thing that's going to take place is this person, and I don't know if I have a Bill in the system, but we'll look for one. Bill has to receive the information, and he is in accounts payable. So what I'm going to do is kind of just move this to the side here so I can keep bringing it back. But right now, what I want to do is I want to build a sequence for Bill. So first things first, I pick Bill, and we'll say this is Bill. Okay, now this is an important number. If I bring this back for just a moment once again, the sequence number is the number or the order from the lower number to the higher numbers of how the system will process. I never try to start with sequence 1. I might start with sequence 10, because that way if I ever have additional workflows that I want to process before that maybe, I still have the numbers 1 through 9 that I can use. So in other words, I'm going to start with 10, and I'm making this up, but this might be 20. Now what you're going to notice here though is since these two people can go at the same time, I'm going to assign the same sequence number to them, like 30, meaning that once 20 is done, it will then go to both 30s. If I had something after that, say a 35 or 40, that means it wouldn't go to that person if I were to put a box right here. It wouldn't go to that person until both Ralph and Pam are done. So we're right here though. We want to build this. So I'm going to go back in. We've picked that it's Bill. We're going to put sequence 10. Move that out of the way. Sequence 10 here. And we'll say that it's going to be 3 days. And Bruce is just going to review the invoice. Okay. I can save and exit if I was done, or just save, meaning I'm going to put in some more sequences. So now that Bill has the document, and when he finishes, it's going to go to Sam to process this. So I'm going to put in the next one. I'm going to put in Sam. Again, I don't know who I have. Oh, there is a Sam. Okay, and Sam will be sequence number 20, and Sam has 2 days. And this is to actually process in AP. Again, I'm going to save because I'm going to continue to add some more. So you could see what's happening here, sequence 10 and 20. I don't use subtasks, but let me explain at least what a subtask would do. You can have 16 layers deep of subtasks. If I was to attach a subtask right here, meaning that once Sam is done, if you had 2, 3, 10 tasks within the subtask, that means that all of those have to complete, and then because you made it a subtask, it goes back to Sam to approve it again. Now I could do that without these subtasks, because really, let's say there were 3 other people and I was through about sequence 50 or 40 or whatever number it is, I could add Sam again as number 50 or 60 or whatever, and Sam would get it again. So I try to stay away from these subtasks. So now I'm going to bring this back once again. And when I look at this, we've got Sam, and now we're ready for Pam and Ralph. So I'm going to go ahead and select somebody like a Pam anyway. And let's see who I have here. I'll just say this is Pam. Okay, so Pam is going to be, we'll just make this sequence number 30. Again, nothing magical about skipping by 10. And we'll just give that 1 day, and we'll just say to process to the GL. And remember sequence 30. So now, because of the fact that I want to build, once again, a workflow here, where now I want to put Ralph that can get it at the same time, or the notification. By the way, the document doesn't go anywhere different. So anyway, so we have to build that last one here. And that's for Ralph. So what we're going to do here is pick something that's, let's see if we have any Ralphs. We'll say that this is Ralph Parks. Okay, and Ralph would be what? Sequence 30, because we want it to process at the same time. Now, number of days, we'll say it takes 1, and we'll say print and mail. And now I'm done with this one, so I'm going to save and exit. Now, I'm going to save, and I now have the new task of vendor invoice with these details. So, I'm just kind of waiting here a moment so you can look at this. And now, this is the way this could process for you. Number one, if you want, you can go into a document type, and I'll pick vendor invoice, for example. And here I'm going to go down to workflow and select vendor invoice. Now, by me saving this, you will notice that when a user puts in a document, and I'm just going to quickly go to an add screen here. When a user goes to put in a document, and I'm going to select the document type vendor invoice. So let's see, vendor invoice under document type here. Just waiting until this blank screen comes up. Okay, there it is. So now what I'm going to do is pick vendor invoice. If I select vendor invoice, you will notice obviously the fields here as well. Now, the system will automatically start up the workflow of vendor invoices when the document is saved. If you would like the user to select a different one, they can, and that would override the automatic one. You do not need to assign it at the automatic level if you don't want to. Okay? We will come back to use workflow business rules in just a few moments, but I wanted to make sure that we all understood that. So now we've built one. So if we go back to the document that we did, now I want to kind of take a look and build this side. And I think I whited out something here. There we go. So this time, I'm just going to build this side, workflow B. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to go back under administration here, under workflow, and manage workflows. I'm going to go a little faster on this one because I think you understand, but I'm going to even call this vendor invoices over 5,000. And the supervisor would be, again, I'm just picking somebody here. Let's pretend Dorothy is the AP person. And this will be workflow for any vendor invoice greater than 5,000. I'll just say greater for those that. Okay. Once again, I save it to get the header created. You will notice I have vendor invoices over 500. I'll click on that. So now I'm ready to start building the tasks. I'm going to jump back to my document here for just a moment, so that in here you can see we're going to Sue first this time, and then to Bill, Sam, and so forth. So we're going to go to Sue first, and I'll just kind of keep it open and just mention to you because I think you understand the concept of going down that list. So we're seeing if we have a Sue here. We'll say this is Sue Miller. And Sue has to look at it because Sue's the CFO. We're going to give this 3 days. Oh, I'm sorry, sequence. I apologize. I'll put sequence 10. Again, could have started at 5 if I wanted to. Going to give her 3 days to review and confirm. We'll say and authorize. Okay, so I'm going to save just because I want to continue to go on. Then we had Bill, if you remember, and Bill was the person that got it the first time on regular vendor invoices, but this case we're doing this a little different because the amount, we have to have the CFO review it first. So then Bill's going to process. And I'm just going back here again. So what I'm doing right now is we've got this one where Bill's doing the process, and now Sam is going to do it. And again, I'll take this off the screen and just mention it again. So here we'll pick Sam. And Sam will be, again, doesn't even matter. I'll just put number 30 just to show you it doesn't even have to be in any special sequence. And 2 days to post. And then after that, we had Pam getting the GL. I think we picked her. I can't remember if that was Pam, but P Downs, that was who we had as Pam. Again, not that it really matters, but, and I'll just put 40 and Pam to post the GL, and we'll just say GL entry. We'll save. And then we've got Ralph for the mailing. Now, when I save this and exit, I want to look at those details again. What if I would have put our parks as 45? That means that Pam first had to say she's done before he would even get notice to go ahead and get it mailed, for example. Okay? Now, here's what you could do. I'm going to save that first. Here's what you could do. From a user perspective, a user could do this. Let's say they were adding a document. And when they add a document here, they're going to, once again, they're going in and they're doing a vendor invoice, for example. Now, they could, when they put in the amount here, say the amount was, $5,600. So what they could do is say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to cover that yet. I apologize. They could go here and say, hey, that vendor invoice is over 500 or 5. I meant to say 5,000. I apologize. I'll change that in a moment. This says vendor invoice is over 5,000. So that means that it's going to use this workflow instead of the standard one that we had set up in the document type. Or, once again, if you don't set it up in the document type, the user could selectively choose right here. Now, I want to talk about workflow business rules. First off, if you have a document being put into the system, like I'm doing this manually, then you can have a default workflow. You could, if you want to, have the user change them. If documents are coming into your system automatically through ARI, in ARI, remember, when it determines the document type, then it goes, okay, that's vendor invoice. But what if the invoice was greater than 5,000 when the document came in? So we have in the system what's referred to under administration as workflow business rules. Workflow business rules could work as follows. I'm going to create a business rule that says vendor invoice is greater than 5,000. This is a business rule now, not a workflow. And here's how it works. If I'm not ready to use this business rule, I don't have to. I would, but if I'm ready to let it use it, I'll check this box. Here is the workflow I want to handle once I set up these parameters. I want it to use vendor invoices over 5,000. Again, it should be 5,000. Priority order is the order in which it will go down. That's important because if a priority number is lower, then what you can do is you can actually take and have that workflow business rule checked before it gets to others. So it's based on, if it matches, it will process based on that one. So 10 would go first, then 20. So in here, I'm just going to put 35 as an example. Now, it's going to be for the document type, vendor invoices. And when I built my document type, I specifically said in the document types, one of the fields I called was the dollar amount or amount. So I'm only going to do one condition, but I could do multiple conditions. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for vendor invoices, for the field amount, if the amount is greater than 5,000, that's it. Because if I do a between, that's for value 1 and value 2. Depending on what type of field it is what your operator choices will be. In other words, if this is a text field, you'll have different choices for operator. But I'm done with this workflow business rule, so I'm going to add that. So by adding that rule, what I'm doing is, I'm going to save that, sorry, I meant to save. By adding that rule called VI greater than 5,000, here's what happens. So taking a look now, here's what we could do. If a user was putting in a document manually, when they put in the document manually and they say vendor invoice here, oops, sorry, wrong field, vendor invoice, then they could just say, hey, let the system figure it out, rather than having to say, well, I know this is over 5,000. But here's the thing. If you don't have that amount in there, it's not going to even look, because that document isn't going to have an amount, which is 0 then. So we have to make sure that the user would fill in the amount. Now you might think about this, and I want to kind of take a look one more time at this so you understand. This was the workflow we wanted to accomplish. When a vendor invoice comes in, we're going to check if we want it to a business rule, if it's greater than 5,000. If it is, we're going to use workflow greater than 5,000, or whatever we had referred to that as. Or I remember we miscalled it 500. Or we were going to just call it vendor invoice and go down the list and process. So there's some different steps here. So now what I wanted to mention is that you know manually how to do this. Meaning, as a user puts it in, they can check it. Obviously, they should make sure they fill in the fields. You will see in Airy session that you, and again, I'm not teaching it right now, so please, I apologize if this is confusing, but here's what I wanted to mention. Understand and know that when you have documents come into the system, like if I have, this is customer, vendor invoices. See this vendor invoices? If we see vendor name or vendor ID or statement or whatever, we could say use workflow business rule. Because now, when you use the workflow business rule, the field would have to be populated. It's not going to be populated because Airy's not bringing it in to do that. Unless, and once again, this will be in the Airy class, but you could assign a template, and a template is the ability to export automatically. When the document comes into the system, it will take those fields and populate them. So on an Airy rule, if you've built a template, once again, I'll leave that out until the Airy session, or watch the Airy session. If you do that, then the system could pick up the fields, the amount, whatever, and then it goes, hey, use the business rule as well, so it files it to the proper location. So that's how it works as far as the setup of workflow. Now, another thing is users will be able to go to their workflow and see the workflow of what they have outstanding. The red represents that they're running late. If I'm a supervisor of workflow tasks, I can be the supervisor here, and I could look up, based on who I'm looking for. Oh, I'm working with, I don't know if Dorothy has anything out there. She doesn't. I could also look if they have anything coming up. This 7 days is anything past due or due in the next 7 days. One last thing I did forget to mention is under admin and workflow, you can set up or establish your status. So I could make these up by calling this approved. And I'll save that. So what happens is when a user's working on a document, if they sign the document, and I'll show you what I mean. Let's say I go into a document here. I'll pick an employee, and I'll pick this document. Couple of things that take place. First of all, if this was on my workflow list to take care of, One of the things I could do, if you want me to, as a part of the system, is I could go down to the bottom here, and right down here, when I finish a workflow, I would just, if you wanted it updated, I could say, oh, that I approve it, because it goes into the audit, that file, that way. But now, even whether I have workflow or not, I wanted to mention this. If I was done with workflow, I could check the box. There'd be a box here that I could check to complete workflow. There would be another one down here that I could check that I'm done. But also, if you want your organization to sign off on it, then they need to know their password, because that's part of compliance. And when they type their password in here, the document will save. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't because it's checked out. But if I did check that, if I did digitally sign it, it would have also put in that I signed it and I said approved. So the workflow status can be used because when the users are filling something out or doing workflow, like if I go to my workflow, I might even update them from here. I might do 3 of these at once. I might say, okay, that one I'm going to approve. This one is a dispute. This one is something like this. I might select them all, because I could even go in and complete them from here. Maybe I'm just looking at some of the information, like we have the dollar amount, and I see it and I go, yeah, that looks right. Maybe I even, eyeball them by just hitting view document and look at them here first. So that's what workflow status will do for you, though. So now let's move on to record retention. To set up record retention, it's very easy. Under the menu, under admin, you can go to setup once again. Under setup, you will notice that there is retentions. Here, you could create, for example, let's say vendor invoices. Let's say we have to keep those for a number of days, months, or years. We're going to say years, and the number of years is 2. It's that easy. I've saved it. Now, what I have to do, though, is we don't want users picking these because they could accidentally pick the wrong one. So under administration, under setup, you can go to document types, and down here, I'll just pick one. Or let me go back to vendor invoices. I apologize. That's what I should have done. So down here, now I could say, instead of this, I could pick vendor invoices. Now I'm not going to save that or keep that, because what will happen is the system will disable anybody, because of compliance rules, from deleting that document, even an administrator. Also, what's nice about using retention, if you want to, and again, you might use it on some documents and others you might not, but if you do use it, you can run a certificate of destruction report. The certificate of destruction, maybe you run it yearly. It'll give you a list of all the documents that have reached the retention period, and then it'll ask the administrator if you want to purge them, because you should get rid of them. You're not supposed to archive them, you're supposed to get rid of them. So the administrator can say yes to it, and then it'll purge the documents for them. So they'll have the report to show that it was the record retention was reached, and that the documents were purged by deletion. So once again, I'm going to set that back just so I don't have it on this one. Now let's talk about a variable name. When a document comes into the system, whether it's automatic or it's manual, and just to show you an example of that, I'm going to file a document in just for a moment. So let's say, just for the purpose of this presentation, and this works both for manually entering documents as well as when documents are automatically entered, whether you want to keep those the same name or not. But in here, what you could do is, let's say I was going to import a document. You will notice that when I select the document itself, when the document comes into the system, let's just pick something from the desktop. Pick this. Okay, I'll just import it. See the name, 2015, whatever? I could change that name right now. I could go in here and say, change that name to whatever. Also, I could, based on the document type, have it set, and I'm just going to call this a vendor invoice. Okay, and the invoice number, I'm going to type in 2461, and the amount is $12. Okay, and it was issued today. Oops, that's not today, sorry. Issued today. Okay, now I'm not going to check workflow business rule. I could, but I already have set for vendor invoices. I do know that it has the one workflow. I could have it go through it though if I wanted to check it. And one of the things I noticed here is at the bottom, it has this variable name set. I'm just going to leave that alone, but you could have multiple variable names. Users do not need to check this box. The reason it is checked right now and filled in is because in the document type for this, somebody selected that. I could turn it off, meaning I'm going to either name it myself or let the system name it. But I'm going to save this document now. So, oh, I didn't even say to put anywhere, sorry. Let's just put it in. Do I have any members in here? Let's see. I don't. I'll just create a member. So we'll say the member name is Pat Caruso, and my ID is that, and my department is payables. Okay. So I saved this document. Now, what I wanted to point out was that document was named whatever, 2015 and so forth. If I go into the system now, I'm just going to jump over to them. And so I'm going to go in and do a locate on folder details. If I go into the system right now and look at this, members, bring them up, notice what it did. It renamed this file with the folder name, the cabinet name, and the date. So the system put in the file all of that information for me automatically. If I bring that document up right now, you will also notice, and it isn't me, but you will also notice that down the side here, that there's a workflow going. I'm not the supervisor, so I can't see that. Let's say somebody typoed the number wrong. Remember, you can have these fields filled in automatically as well if you wanted them to by just running what we call the workflow business rule. But I'm going to do this. I'm going to say this invoice is for $6,000. And I'm going to say use the workflow business rule to see if that document might be incorrect or maybe it needs to refile. So I could say use the workflow business rule and save the document as well. And it looks like it might begin a new one, so it's going to recalculate or continue by deciding which one that it should do in this case. In other words, based on the amount. Once again, remember, I could have the system fill in those values because just to show you, this is in the ARI class, but I have templates. And if I have a template that's grabbing information, and I'll show you an example of one right here, customer invoices, for example. I'm grabbing the statement number from somewhere on there, and it's going to populate that in. Okay? So, in any case, though, if I open this folder, I just want to open the document now. And looking at the document, I could rename the document again if I have to. I can obviously go up here and make changes to it if I have to or whatever it needs to do. But also look what's happened. It's changed the workflow. The workflow is not vendor invoices anymore. It's now vendors over 5,000. Again, typo on my part. So you could see what happens. Now, the workflow, I apologize, the naming that we had. Under administration, setup, you can do what we call global or variable naming. I could set up one just called global and use it for everything, but here's how it works. I'm going to call these, and again, I could use global and then the system will always be consistent, but I'm going to call these for AP invoices. And in this case, I decide what fields I want. Metadata field 1 might be the amount or whatever. So maybe I want it to have first the folder name, which would be Pat Caruso if it's the members one. Okay. or I'm sorry, on the AP invoices. I could put in the user that put the document in. I might put the cabinet type. If I want, I could even put the invoice number, or I'm sorry, the invoice there. Now, I can pick even metadata fields. Maybe this will be field 3 and metadata field 2. I don't know if I have everything in any of these fields, but by the way, if you put the same number, 3 and 3, it will put an underscore between those fields rather than a space. So in other words, it would be Pat space Caruso space, and then it would be the document type, and then it would be whatever metadata field 1 is, underscore metadata 2. I could even put in hard coding here, meaning I want to put at the end APINV. I don't know, if I wanted to, I could do that. Maybe that'll be the, fourth field over. I can put in all of these other pieces of information from the document. So if I save that now, and now I'm going to assign this variable name at the document type. Remember, users can do this as well, but if I go under admin, down to to the setup, to document type. There were those 3 boxes in the bottom. Again, I'll pick on vendor invoices. There's those 3 boxes at the bottom that we've been working with today, really. Record retention, workflow, and variable name. So we're going to pick the variable name AP invoices for this and save and exit. So let's go back in, and if I wanted to, I'm going to open the last document I did by hitting this back arrow. That's the last updated document, I should say, that I put in anyway, which I would think will be this one. So as I look at this particular document here, I am going to, that was the last one that I updated. That's right, I apologize. That's the one I was touching just a moment ago on my other screen. So let me just go back in and grab members. Oops. Here, folder details, members. By the way, I could even have it just try this here. I want to update the names of some of these documents. So I don't have to go into the system, because let's say some documents get in and they named them funny, or they just kept the name that you didn't have a variable name set. You can always go back and do it again too as well. Now look, when I clicked on it, now it has Pat Caruso, it has the document type, it captured the invoice number, it captured the dollar amount in here, and then it put APINV. Notice the underscore, because that was between those 2 fields. So even though I set it at the document type, meaning let it do it automatically, users could override that. They could turn that off when they add a document, or even if they wanted to change the name right now, they could simply go down here and say don't use the variable name anymore, and maybe rename it whatever they want. Okay, so with that, we're going to open it up for questions now.